If you are listening to this right now, chances are the world around you has grown quiet. Perhaps the lights are dim, your blankets are pulled close, and you're ready to let your mind drift away from the chaotic demands of the modern day. I am truly glad you are here with me tonight. Take a deep, slow breath, let your shoulders drop, and allow yourself to sink into a state of absolute comfort. Tonight, we are embarking on a journey back in time, traveling to an era you might have read about, yet seen through a lens that history books so often completely overlook. Imagine, if you will, the cold and bitter autumn of the year 1932. The Great Depression has firmly tightened its devastating grip on America. Across the nation, towering banks have collapsed like fragile houses of cards. Family savings built over generations have vanished into thin air, and the proud spirit of a country feels deeply fractured. If you walk down the grey, misty streets of New York, Chicago, or Detroit, you will see lines, endless, winding, heartbreaking lines of men standing outside soup kitchens, waiting patiently in the freezing air for just a single bowl of warm broth. Famous photographers of the era, Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, Margaret Bourke-White, roamed these exact streets with their cameras, capturing the raw, haunting agony of a suffering nation. Their iconic photographs defined an entire generation. But there is a profound, chilling mystery that stops modern historians completely cold when they examine these historical archives today. If you look closely at those thousands of photographs of breadlines and relief stations, a haunting question begins to emerge. Where were the women? Not the traditional wives standing by their husbands, not the weary mothers with frightened children clinging desperately to their wool coats. We are talking about the other women, the independent women, the ones who lived entirely alone in small rooming houses, the ones without a husband to lean on, without a traditional family safety net, and without anyone to catch them when the economic floor gave way beneath their feet. They were not captured in those photographs. In the grand visual record of the Great Depression, they are almost completely, heartbreakingly invisible. Were they invisible because they were not suffering? Or were they invisible simply because the society of the 1930s chose not to look at them? The answer to this question is both beautiful and devastating, tied deeply to something as fundamentally simple, yet incredibly complex as a woman's own name. In an era where a woman's legal and social identity was almost entirely swallowed by her husband's family name upon marriage, those who dared to navigate the world under their own terms found themselves fighting a quiet, unspoken war for recognition. A name in the 1930s was not just a collection of letters, it was a declaration of existence, a legal boundary, and a reflection of a massive cultural shift. As we prepare to dive deeper into the quiet, untold daily struggles of these extraordinary women, let your thoughts wander back to their world, a world of ink-stained documents, strictly traditional public records, and the slow, heavy turning of social conventions. The channel Sleepy History with Kevin is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. To truly understand how the women of the 1930s found themselves navigating such an invisible path, we must first look backward to the world they inherited. The decade that came before the famous, chaotic, and dazzling 1920s had felt like a historical miracle for American women. It was a time of unprecedented noise, motion, and sudden liberation. For centuries, women had been told to sit quietly at the very edges of public life, to exist strictly within the private boundaries of the home, and to allow their fathers or husbands to speak for them in the eyes of the law. But in the year 1920, after decades of exhausting, dangerous, and deeply passionate activism, the 19th Amendment was finally ratified. American women won the right to vote. This was not merely a mechanical change in legal policy, it was a profound psychological earthquake. For the very first time in their lives, millions of women walked into polling booths, picked up a pen, and signed their own names on official documents as full, recognized citizens of the United States. The culture around them seemed to shift almost overnight. The 20s introduced the world to the flapper, that iconic, rebellious image of a young woman with short, bobbed hair, wearing rolled stockings, dancing the Charleston until the early hours of the morning, and openly defying the rigid moral codes of her grandmother's generation. Of course, historical reality is often less glamorous than the myths we see in movies. The vast majority of American women in the 1920s were not wealthy flappers spending their nights in secret speakeasies. Most were ordinary, hard-working individuals doing heavy laundry, raising large families on tight budgets, and trying their best to make ends meet in rural towns and crowded city tenements. Yet the symbol of the modern, independent woman mattered immensely. It sent a clear message to the entire nation. A woman's life could belong to herself. She could hold a job in a bustling city office, earn her own paycheck, rent her own apartment, and decide for herself when, or even if, she wanted to take a man's name in marriage. But just as this fragile sense of independence was beginning to take root in the soil of the American consciousness, the clock struck midnight on the decade. In October of 1929, the golden dream of the 20s collapsed with a terrifying, thunderous roar on Wall Street. The stock market crash did not just evaporate billions of dollars of wealth overnight, it fundamentally fractured the collective psyche of the nation. As the country tumbled headfirst into the dark, freezing waters of the 1930s, a strange and restrictive survival instinct took over the American public. When a society becomes deeply, bone-deep frightened for its economic survival, it rarely moves forward into progress. Instead, it tends to retreat backward, reaching desperately for what feels safe, traditional, and deeply familiar. In 1930s America, safety meant the traditional family unit. It meant a world where men were the undisputed breadwinners who went out into the harsh world to provide, and women were the quiet caretakers who remained safely hidden inside the domestic sphere. Anyone who existed outside of this approved traditional structure was suddenly viewed not just as an anomaly, but as a direct threat to the fragile stability of a wounded nation. As the traditional structure of society tightened its boundaries, a quiet statistical crisis began to unfold across the American landscape. Between the years 1929 and 1939, the marriage rate in the United States plummeted by a staggering 22%. This was an unprecedented drop that carried profound social implications. Think about what that number truly means for a moment as you rest your mind in the quiet of this evening. It means that millions of young women who had grown up expecting to follow the traditional path of marriage, millions who would have ordinarily found financial security, a shared household, and a stable social identity tied to a husband's name, suddenly found themselves standing entirely alone. The reasons for this sharp decline were as varied as they were heartbreaking. In many cases, the young men they loved simply could not afford to start a family. To marry in the 1930s meant taking on the immense financial responsibility of a household at a time when finding a steady job felt like chasing a ghost. Countless courtships were extended indefinitely, stretching into years of waiting, filled with whispered promises in the dark and anxious calculations over dinner tables. Other relationships fractured permanently under the unbearable daily weight of poverty. For many women, remaining single was not a passive misfortune, but a conscious, painful choice. They looked at the economic devastation around them and realized that marrying a man without an income would not bring safety. It would only double the hunger. And so an entire generation of independent, unmarried women emerged into the sunlight of the 1930s. They were secretaries, clerks, seamstresses, teachers, and domestic workers, navigating a harsh economic winter without a partner. Yet, despite their vast numbers, the institutional machinery of America simply did not know how to see them. The cultural and legal systems of the era were built upon a singular, rigid assumption that every woman belonged to a man. In the eyes of the law, a woman was typically categorized as either the daughter of a father or the wife of a husband. When a woman remained single, earning her own living and signing her own papers, she broke the expected pattern. This mismatch between reality and expectation created a strange, haunting form of social invisibility in public records, census data, and newspaper reports, these women were frequently blurred into the background. They were often viewed as temporary anomalies, individuals waiting in a societal holding room until normalcy returned. But as the months of the Depression stretched into long, weary years, these women continued to walk the city streets, their pockets light, their hearts heavy, carrying the full weight of their own existences under names that the world around them was not yet ready to fully honor. To understand the emotional landscape of this era, one must look at the profound double standard that existed in the public's perception of suffering. When an ordinary man stood in a crowded urban soup kitchen line in 1932, his head bowed against the winter wind, he was viewed by the public as a tragic symbol of a failing economic system. The newspapers photographed him with immense dignity and sympathy. He was a husband who had been denied the right to provide for his family, a victim of national circumstance whose dignity remained intact despite his empty pockets. But when a single woman found herself in that very same position, the gaze of society changed completely. A woman standing alone in a public relief line, especially if she had no husband beside her and no children clinging to her dress, was often viewed not with sympathy, but with quiet disapproval and embarrassment. To the conservative eyes of the 1930s public, her presence there was a sign of a personal flaw, a failure to secure the protection of a proper home. Society looked at her and wondered why she was not being cared for by a father, a brother, or a husband. Her hunger was treated as an awkward social problem rather than a national tragedy. This harsh societal judgment forced many independent women to hide their poverty behind a fragile mask of respectability. They would meticulously wash and mend their only good dress each night, polishing their worn leather shoes with ink to cover the scuffs, ensuring that when they walked into an employment agency or a government office, they looked like women who were merely experiencing a temporary streak of bad luck. They kept their voices low, their postures straight, and their struggles intensely private, suffering in the quiet shadows of rented rooms where no photographer would ever find them. They became masters of an invisible survival, navigating a system that preferred they did not exist as independent entities. Each time they signed a lease, filled out a job application, or applied for a small amount of government relief under their own unmarried names, they were quietly asserting their right to survive on their own terms, despite a world that constantly tried to push them back into the margins. All stories on this channel, Sleepy History with Kevin, are fictional, thoughtfully crafted around historical themes and inspired by real events, figures, and periods, reimagined for engaging storytelling. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental. The struggle for a woman to maintain her own identity in the 1930s was not just an emotional battle. It was woven deeply into the bureaucratic fabric of everyday life. Imagine the simple act of opening a bank account, renting a small apartment, or signing a contract for a utilities company. For a man, this was a straightforward transaction requiring nothing more than his signature, but for a woman, the simple act of writing her own name on a piece of official paper was fraught with traditional friction. During this era, administrative customs strongly dictated that a married woman's legal existence was largely absorbed into her husband's. Official documents, society columns, and even utility bills were almost universally addressed to Mrs. John Smith, completely erasing the woman's given name, whether it was Eleanor, Margaret, or Mary. If a woman was unmarried, she was constantly subjected to questioning about her status. Clerks behind heavy wooden desks would look at a single woman with suspicion, wondering aloud if she had a male guarantor, a father or a brother who could co-sign the document to ensure its validity. This administrative erasure meant that every time an independent woman insisted on using her own first name and maiden surname on a legal document, she was performing a small, quiet act of resistance. She was declaring to the state and to the community around her that she existed as a distinct individual with her own financial responsibilities and her own legal standing. It was an exhausting daily negotiation against a system that preferred she remain a footnote in a man's ledger. As we pause to reflect on these quiet battles for individual recognition, let your mind rest deeply in the peacefulness of this night. If you feel a connection to these forgotten stories of resilience, and if you wish to journey further into the quiet corners of our shared past, please take a brief moment to support this channel. Click the subscribe button, leave a gentle like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your presence here helps ensure that these invisible lives are finally remembered and honored. The battlefield of identity in 1930s America was perhaps nowhere more fiercely contested than in the workplace. As the economic crisis deepened, competition for any available job became cutthroat, and a dark wave of resentment washed over the labor market. The public began to demand that what few jobs remained should be preserved exclusively for male breadwinners. This sentiment quickly crystallized into institutional policy through what became known as marriage bars. These were formal and informal regulations implemented by schools, banks, government offices, and private corporations that legally permitted or mandated the immediate firing of a female employee the moment she got married. The underlying social philosophy was clear, if deeply flawed. A married woman had a husband to support her, and by keeping her job, she was accused of stealing bread from the mouth of a starving family. This policy, however, ignored the harsh reality that many husbands were unemployed, disabled, or had abandoned their families under the psychological weight of the Depression. To survive this hostile environment, thousands of working women were forced into an existence of profound secrecy and constant anxiety. They entered into clandestine marriages, keeping their weddings entirely hidden from their employers, their co-workers, and the community at large. To maintain their employment and continue earning the paychecks that kept their households alive, these women had to live a double life. In the office, they continued to use their maiden names, strictly forbidding their husbands from calling them at work, and refusing to wear their wedding bands within a 10-block radius of their workplaces. Every single day, as these women signed their maiden names on payroll sheets, time cards, and official correspondence, they were balancing on a high wire. A single slip of the tongue, an unexpected visit from a family member, or a letter addressed to their married name could mean instant dismissal and financial ruin. The simple act of writing one's original name became a protective armor, a necessary shield used to navigate a system that penalized them for seeking both companionship and economic survival. Among all the professional fields where women fought to maintain their independent standing, none felt the crushing weight of institutional pressure quite like public education. For decades leading up to the 1930s, teaching had been one of the very few respected paths available to an educated woman who wished to earn her own living and build a life of dignity. In schools across America, from the small one-room schoolhouses of the rural Midwest to the massive brick institutions of Chicago and New York, women were the foundational bedrock of the educational system. In these classrooms, a woman was known explicitly by her own name to generations of children. She was Miss Davis, Miss Higgins, or Miss Taylor. This title was more than just a polite form of address. It was a public acknowledgement of her specialized skill, her authority, and her professional dedication. However, as the financial darkness of the Great Depression deepened, school boards across the country became the fiercest enforcers of the marriage bars. Suddenly, a woman's excellence in teaching, her years of experience, and her deep bond with her students meant absolutely nothing if she decided to marry. School districts openly passed resolutions stating that the contracts of female teachers would become null and void the moment they entered into matrimony. The public justification was always wrapped in the language of economic morality, claiming that it was unpatriotic for one household to have two incomes while other families had none. This placed thousands of dedicated educators in an agonizing position. They were forced to choose between the work they loved, the work that gave them an independent identity and a sense of purpose, and the natural human desire for companionship and a family of their own. Many chose to remain unmarried, sacrificing their personal lives to keep their classrooms, living quiet, solitary lives in rented boarding houses. Others chose to marry in total secrecy, traveling to distant counties or neighboring states where their names wouldn't be recognized on a marriage license, and continuing to sign their teaching contracts with their maiden names, living in constant, low-grade terror that a single gossiping neighbor or a misplaced piece of mail would discover their secret and strip them of their livelihood overnight. During the long, quiet years of the 1930s, before the arrival of instant global communication, the local post office served as the vital heartbeat of every American community. It was a place of heavy wooden counters, the faint smell of ink and paper, and rows of small brass lockboxes. In this setting, the name written on an envelope carried immense social and personal weight. For an independent woman living in a bustling city or a small rural town, her daily mail was a tangible reflection of how the world chose to recognize her existence. Every morning, as thousands of women stepped up to post office windows or checked the mailboxes in the dim hallways of their apartment buildings, they confronted the shifting boundaries of their identity. A letter addressed to a woman using her own first name and surname was a powerful validation. It signaled that the sender viewed her as a self-sufficient individual, perhaps a professional colleague, a creative artist, or an independent taxpayer. Conversely, receiving mail exclusively addressed to her under a husband's full name could feel like a quiet erasure, a reminder that society viewed her primarily as a dependent extension of another person's legal standing. For those women who were secretly married to protect their employment, the post office became a place of strategic navigation. They had to arrange for private mailboxes or instruct loved ones to use specific names on correspondence to prevent their double lives from unraveling before the eyes of a curious postmaster. The envelope was not just a container for news, it was a daily negotiation of public perception and personal autonomy. As we let our minds wander through these quiet corridors of history, listening to the gentle echo of steps from a bygone era, let us remember the value of being recognized for who we truly are. If you find peace and comfort in these historical reflections, please take a brief, gentle moment to support our journey together. Consider hitting the subscribe button, leaving a like on this video, and dropping a comment about your favorite historical era. Your kind support helps keep these quiet conversations alive night after night. As we sit together in the quiet luxury of this evening, it is vital to acknowledge that the weight of a name was not distributed equally across the American landscape. The experience of social invisibility was deeply fractured by the harsh realities of race, class, and geographic location. While a middle-class white woman fought a subtle, bureaucratic battle to keep her maiden name on a bank account or a teaching contract, women of color in the 1930s were forced to navigate a system that often refused to grant them even the most basic elements of human dignity in public discourse. In the segregated American South, as well as in the crowded urban centers of the North, black women were systematically denied the polite titles of address that white society took for granted. White clerks, store owners, and government officials routinely refused to address a black woman as Miss or Mrs. regardless of her age, education, or marital status. Instead, they would call her strictly by her first name or worse, use generic demeaning terms like auntie or girl. This intentional erasure of formal surnames was a deliberate tool used to reinforce racial hierarchies, stripping a woman of her adult status and her family identity in a single careless breath. For Mexican-American women working in the vast agricultural fields of the Southwest, or immigrant women laboring in the dark garment factories of New York, their foreign-sounding names were frequently anglicized against their will by immigration officers, foremen, and social workers who simply refused to learn the correct pronunciations. A beautiful ancestral family name could be crossed out with a single stroke of a lead pencil on a hiring sheet, replaced by a shortened, simplified version that felt completely alien to the woman who bore it. When President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal relief programs to combat the Great Depression, this intersecting discrimination became financially catastrophic. Programs like the Works Progress Administration were designed with the rigid assumption that white male heads of households should receive priority for government-funded jobs. When local relief boards looked at applications filled out by single black women or immigrant mothers, their names were frequently pushed to the very bottom of the pile or discarded entirely. To have your name left off the government payroll did not just mean a loss of administrative identity, it meant facing the cold reality of starvation in a rented room where no help was coming. While the vast majority of ordinary women fought their battles for identity in the quiet, mundane corners of offices and schools, a small but highly visible group of women waged this war in the public square of American culture. These were the writers, journalists, artists, and intellectuals of the 1930s, women who understood that a name was not just a legal label, but a powerful personal brand and a declaration of intellectual property. In the creative industries, the fight to own one's name took on a uniquely defiant character. For decades, female writers had often hidden behind male pseudonyms to ensure their manuscripts would be taken seriously by conservative publishing houses, but by the 1930s, a growing number of prominent women refused to hide. Journalists like Dorothy Thompson, authors like Zora Neale Hurston, and photographers like Margaret Bourke White splashed their real, unmodified names across front pages, book covers, and gallery exhibitions. They demanded that the world look directly at their work and recognize the specific, feminine intellect behind it, entirely independent of any marital alliance. For married women in these creative fields, maintaining their maiden name as their professional name was a matter of fierce pride. It was an explicit statement that their creative genius did not belong to the household, it belonged to them alone. They formed organizations, wrote passionate essays, and debated fiercely in salons about the psychological necessity of keeping the name they were born with. They recognized that to surrender one's name upon marriage was to risk losing a piece of the creative soul that had built their success in the first place. As we reflect on the courageous voices of these pioneering women who refused to let their names be drowned out by the currents of tradition, let us appreciate the quiet space we share tonight. If you find value in these late-night journeys into the heart of human history, please take a quick, gentle moment to support the channel. Subscribe to Sleepy History with Kevin, hit the like button, and leave a comment to let me know you're listening. Your beautiful support helps this peaceful community grow, ensuring these stories continue to soothe and inform us night after night. The quiet resilience of women in the 1930s did not emerge from a vacuum. It was nurtured, in large part, by the silent companion of lonely nights, the written word. In public libraries across the nation, places that were free, warm, and welcoming to anyone seeking shelter from the bitter cold of the Depression, single and married women alike found a sanctuary of ideas. They reached for the shelves and pulled down books written by the pioneering minds of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, public domain works that had begun to challenge the very foundations of traditional marriage and legal dependency. In the quiet corners of these libraries, a young woman could open a book and read essays demanding that women be recognized as full human beings, entitled to their own property, their own thoughts, and indeed their own names. These texts operated like a quiet underground river, flowing beneath the harsh, restrictive surface of 1930s society. They provided a vocabulary for the vague discontent that many women felt when forced to sign away their identity on a marriage certificate. A woman sitting alone at a wooden reading table, tracing her finger over words written decades before her birth, realized that her struggle for autonomy was part of a grand, historical tapestry. These classic literary works inspired women to view their everyday administrative battles not as isolated miseries, but as meaningful acts of historical continuity. When a secretary insisted on keeping her original name on an office roster, or when a widow refused to be defined solely by her late husband's debts, they were carrying forward the torch lit by the authors of the past. The library books became a silent counselor, reminding an entire generation of troubled American women that their names were worth fighting for, even when the world around them insisted on their erasure. This content is inspired by and adapted from public domain works available through Project Gutenberg. The material has been transformed through original narration, editing, and storytelling to create a unique experience for educational and entertainment purposes. As the middle of the decade approached, the federal government's New Deal initiatives began to establish local relief offices in nearly every major town and city across America. For many independent women, walking through the heavy glass doors of these administrative centers was an act of absolute desperation. The rooms were consistently crowded, filled with the loud clatter of mechanical typewriters, the heavy scent of damp wool coats, and the low, anxious murmur of people waiting for hours to be called forward. When a single or secretly married woman finally heard her name called by a government caseworker, she stepped into a specialized and highly intrusive world of questioning. These caseworkers, who were often overwhelmed by their massive workloads, were trained to investigate every single aspect of an applicant's private life before approving a single dollar of financial aid. For a woman presenting herself under her own independent name, the interrogation was uniquely exhausting. The government official would look over the paperwork with a critical, squinting eye, demanding to know why a woman of her age was living alone in a rented room rather than residing safely under the roof of a father, a brother, or a former husband. If she was using her maiden name but suspected of being married, the questioning became an interrogation. The state wanted to ensure that it was not providing financial relief to a woman whose husband was simply hiding from his familial duties or working an unregistered job down the street. Every document she produced, rent receipts, old employment records, personal letters, was carefully examined to see if the name she claimed matched the name she lived by in the eyes of her neighbors. For these women, standing before a government desk felt like being placed on trial for the crime of independent survival. They had to defend not only their deep economic need, but the very validity of their non-traditional life choices, proving over and over again that their independent identity was not a fraudulent cover, but a true and dignified reflection of their daily reality. As we continue our journey through the quiet shadows of the 1930s, let us turn our thoughts toward another group of women whose struggles with identity were deeply poignant, yet rarely spoken about in public forums. These were the older women of the era, the elderly widows, the lifelong single women, and those who had spent their entire youth laboring in the background of a rapidly changing America. For them, the onset of the Great Depression was not just an economic catastrophe. It was a profound threat to the fragile legacy of their names. For a woman who had spent 30 or 40 years married, her identity had been so thoroughly integrated into her husband's legal persona that his passing often left her in a strange administrative vacuum. In the 1930s, before the comprehensive implementation of national social security benefits, private pension plans and older state relief systems were notoriously rigid. If a husband died, his pension often died with him, leaving the widow with a name that carried historical respect in her neighborhood, but held absolutely no legal currency in the hallways of financial institutions. When these older women attempted to claim remaining family assets or apply for municipal charity under their own given names, they were frequently met with bureaucratic brick walls. Clerks would demand to see decades-old marriage certificates, birth records from forgotten family Bibles, and endless character references just to prove that the elderly woman standing before them was indeed the legal rightful owner of her own life story. Yet, despite the exhausting weight of these demands, these matriarchs exhibited a remarkable, quiet resilience. They gathered in the evenings on the porches of shared boarding houses or in the quiet corners of community kitchens, passing down family histories, ensuring that the younger generation of women understood exactly where they came from. They refused to let their individual names be buried alongside their husbands, carrying their heads high through the twilight of their lives, proving that a woman's dignity was not something that withered away when her youth or her marriage certificate faded into history. To fully capture the spirit of this complex era, we must also look at the powerful images that flickered across the silver screens of neighborhood movie theaters and filled the glossy pages of popular women's magazines. In the 1930s, popular culture existed in a state of fascinating, intense contradiction regarding the identity of women. On one hand, Hollywood was entering its golden age, elevating fierce, independent actresses like Katharine Hepburn, Bette Davis, and Joan Crawford to superstardom. These women were celebrated for their sharp wit, their modern style, and above all their fiercely independent names which commanded absolute respect and top billing worldwide. Young women sitting in the dark warmth of the theatre would look up at these silver screen icons, drawing immense strength from characters who managed to navigate the world without ever surrendering their personal autonomy or their names to a man. It offered a beautiful, fleeting dream of a world where a woman's identity could be vast, creative, and entirely self-made. Yet, the moment the theatre lights came back on and these women returned to reality, they were confronted by a completely different message in the popular media of the day. The advertisements and advice columns in mainstream women's magazines were saturated with a quiet, persistent anxiety. They urged women to remember that their truest, most patriotic duty during the economic crisis was to support the morale of men. Society columns continuously reinforced the idea that a woman's greatest achievement was to see her name replaced by her husband's in the local announcement section, framing the surrender of her maiden name as the ultimate act of love and national stability. This constant cultural tug-of-war created a deep internal conflict within the minds of millions of ordinary American women. They found themselves caught between the inspiring promise of modern independence and the heavy, crushing pressure of traditional social expectations. Every time they picked up a pen to sign a document, they were quietly negotiating these two opposing worlds, wondering in the silence of their own hearts which version of their name would ultimately endure the test of time. As the long, exhausting years of the 1930s slowly drew toward a close, the landscape of America began to experience the very first ripples of a massive, unstoppable transformation. The heavy economic winter that had frozen the nation for nearly a decade was gradually giving way to the frantic industrial roar of a country preparing for a looming global conflict. In factories, offices, and shipyards across the land, the demand for labour would soon shift so dramatically that the restrictive marriage bars and conservative social barriers of the past decade would begin to fracture under the sheer weight of necessity. But the true victory of this era did not belong to the sweeping changes of macroeconomics or the grand legislation of politicians. The true victory belonged to the quiet, daily endurance of the millions of women who had simply refused to be erased during the darkest hours of the Great Depression. By insisting on writing their own names on employment rolls, by fighting to keep their maiden identities alive in secret marriages, and by managing their independent households with fierce dignity, they had proven something monumental to a skeptical world. They had demonstrated that a woman's identity was not a fragile luxury to be discarded during a national crisis, but a foundational, permanent reality of human society. They left behind a quiet legacy written in ink on millions of dusty public documents, faded payroll sheets, and personal letters preserved in family trunks. These were not dramatic statements made from public podiums, but they were the essential, steady stepping stones upon which the next generation of women would stand to build a more open and equitable world. As you lie here in the deep, peaceful stillness of the night, let your thoughts wander gently back to those quiet historical figures. Picture them for a moment, the dedicated school teachers, the tired but proud secretaries, the resilient mothers and independent artists, all carefully signing their names under the dim light of oil lamps and office bulbs, holding fast to the simple, profound truth of who they were, entirely unmade by the storm around them. In the deep, quiet hours of the night, as we look back through the misty windows of the past, we find that the struggle for a name was rarely fought entirely in isolation. Human beings possess a natural, beautiful instinct to seek out companionship when the world outside grows cold and indifferent. In the crowded tenement buildings of industrial cities and the low-cost rooming houses of urban neighborhoods, a quiet, informal phenomenon began to take root during the mid-1930s. The emergence of cooperative households created entirely by single, independent women. To save their precious, hard-earned pennies from being completely swallowed by rent, 3, 4, or sometimes 5 women would move into a single small apartment designed for one. They pooled their meager wages, shared their worn winter clothing, and took turns cooking simple, inexpensive meals over single-burner stoves. In these warm, dimly lit domestic spaces, the rigid rules of the patriarchal world outside simply ceased to apply. Within the safety of these 4 walls, these women did not have to justify their unmarried status or hide behind the protective titles of absent husbands. Instead, they addressed each other with absolute respect, utilizing the names they chose for themselves. These cooperative apartments became places of profound mutual protection. If a woman was secretly married to keep her job at the local department store, her housemates became the fierce keepers of her secret. They would answer the communal telephone with careful caution, screening calls from employers and meticulously sorting through the mail to ensure that no piece of correspondence exposed her dual existence to the world. This quiet, unheralded sisterhood created a powerful emotional buffer against the daily psychological wear and tear of the Great Depression. They listened to each other's anxieties in the dark after the apartment lights were turned down, offering quiet words of encouragement that kept despair at bay. They were proving, without ever intending to write a political manifesto, that a community of women could survive, thrive, and maintain its own dignity through nothing more than shared resourcefulness, mutual respect, and the profound, unspoken decision to never let each other fall into the shadows of anonymity. As the decade slowly advanced toward its inevitable conclusion, the silent friction surrounding a woman's name began to spill into the austere, wood-paneled rooms of local civil courts and family tribunals across America. While the public focus remained fixed on massive macroeconomic relief, a quiet legal revolution was being fought case by case, document by document. These were the arenas where women who had experienced the painful fracturing of their marriages came to reclaim what the law had so easily allowed to be submerged upon their wedding day. In the 1930s, seeking a divorce or a formal separation was a process laden with severe social stigma and immense financial peril. For a woman, walking into a courthouse meant exposing her private grief to the cold, calculating gaze of public record. Yet, under the immense economic pressures of the Depression, countless families split apart, leaving thousands of women to navigate the legal system entirely on their own. In these intense proceedings, the question of what surname a woman would bear moving forward became a crucial point of identity and self-determination. Many conservative judges of the era looked with deep disapproval upon women who requested to legally divest themselves of their husbands' names and return permanently to their maiden surnames. The courts often operated under the archaic assumption that maintaining the husband's name preserved a semblance of social order and family continuity, especially if children were involved. To stand before a magistrate and firmly insist on the restoration of one's original name was to challenge the very core of domestic custom. For these women, securing that legal decree was a profound emotional victory. When the heavy iron seal of the court was finally stamped onto the final paperwork, certifying that she was once again recognized solely by the name her parents had given her at birth, it felt like stepping out of a suffocating fog into the clear, sharp light of day. It was a formal declaration that her period of dependency was officially over, and that whatever future she built from the ruins of the Great Depression, she would face it entirely under her own terms, signed with her own unaltered hand. Away from the sterile atmosphere of government courtrooms and the busy noise of commercial offices, there existed an even more intimate repository where the true names of 1930s women were fiercely preserved. This was the quiet, sacred world of personal scrapbooks, private diaries, and handwritten family trees kept in the deep drawers of bedroom vanities. In an era when the official public archives frequently blurred a woman's distinct individuality, these domestic volumes became a vital, self-made record of authentic human existence. During the long, quiet evenings of the Depression, when spending money on public entertainment was an impossible luxury, many women turned inward, dedicating their hours to the meticulous creation of memory books. Within the protective leather covers of these scrapbooks, a woman reigned as the sole author of her own history. Here she would carefully paste newspaper clippings of her minor achievements, programs from church plays she had directed, and neat labels from the small businesses she dreamed of opening. Most importantly, in these pages, she wrote her name exactly as she wished to see it. If she was a single woman facing the patronizing pity of her neighbors, her diary proudly recorded her professional thoughts, her secret creative writings, and her personal financial calculations under her own bold signature. If she was a married woman living under the administrative shadow of her husband's initials, her scrapbook remained a sanctuary where her maiden name and her given name were beautifully written in flowing fountain pen ink, surrounded by delicate pressed flowers and faded photographs from her independent youth. These private books were far more than mere hobbies. They were a profound act of historical preservation. They served as a silent, unyielding protest against a society that sought to minimize their individual contributions. By keeping these detailed records, the women of the 1930s were ensuring that even if the official census takers and city directories forgot the exact contours of their lives, their children, their daughters, and the generations of women yet unborn would one day open these dusty covers and discover the true, vibrant names of the independent individuals who had held their families and their country together through the darkest economic winter. As the night deepens and the world around you becomes completely still, let your mind reflect on the physical beauty of a simple act, the movement of a pen across a clean sheet of paper. In the 1930s, long before the invention of digital keys or electronic documentation, the handwritten signature was the ultimate token of human verification. It was a deeply personal, irreplaceable expression of an individual's will. For the independent woman of this era, the development and execution of her personal signature was akin to carving her own monument out of the shifting sands of a turbulent society. If you were to look through the surviving correspondence of that decade, you would notice a remarkable trend in the penmanship of these women. Their signatures were rarely hesitant or faint, even when writing on cheap, coarse wartime paper with a leaky fountain pen. Their lines were incredibly bold, fluid, and filled with distinctive character. The elegant loops of their capital letters and the sharp, decisive crossings of their T's spoke volumes about an inner fortitude that the economic depression could not diminish. When a woman sat at a kitchen table late at night under the soft golden amber glow of a single lamp and signed her name to a letter, she was engaging in a moment of pure self-awareness. In those flowing strokes of dark blue or black ink, she brought together her past, her current struggles, and her unspoken dreams for the future. That signature was her bond, her currency, and her absolute truth. It did not matter if the local city registry chose to ignore her, or if the mainstream culture tried to submerge her identity under another's title. The ink dried on the paper, creating an indelible, physical proof that she was present, that she was fighting, and that her individual journey mattered. These thousands of hand-signed letters, travelling silently across the vast American continent by train and postal truck, formed an invisible web of human connection. They carried the heavy weight of financial anxieties, the warmth of distant love, and the quiet reassurance that despite the immense economic coldness of the world, their individual spirits remained entirely unbroken, signed and sealed under names that belonged to no one but themselves. As we let our minds drift further into the peaceful silence of this evening, let us turn our attention toward the quiet, sterile corridors of municipal hospitals, rural clinics, and emergency relief stations. During the 1930s, the economic devastation of the Great Depression brought with it a profound public health crisis. Widespread malnutrition, lack of proper heating, and unsanitary living conditions in crowded urban tenements led to frequent outbreaks of illness. In this dark and challenging landscape, a dedicated army of women stepped forward to serve on the front lines of human survival, the nurses, public health workers, and medical assistants of America. In these demanding environments, a woman's professional name carried an immense weight of authority, trust, and comforting reassurance. When a patient arrived at a clinic, frightened and shivering from winter cold, the very first voice they heard was often that of a nurse who introduced herself by her formal name: Nurse Evans, Miss Gallagher, or Sister Martinez. This name became an anchor of hope in a moment of absolute vulnerability. Day after day, night after night, these medical women carried out the heavy, exhausting labour of healing. They administered medications, tended to failing bodies, and kept careful watch over overcrowded wards under the dim glow of emergency lamps. Most importantly, they were the official keepers of the medical record. It was their responsibility to pick up the clipboard and fill out the charts, carefully signing their own names at the bottom of every medical progress report, every vaccination log, and every emergency admission form. In a world that frequently attempted to deny them an independent legal standing, their signatures on these official medical documents held the power of life and death. When a child was born into the poverty of a Hooverville shantytown, it was the steady hand of a public health nurse that recorded the birth, writing her own name alongside that of the mother, ensuring that a new human life was officially recognized by the state. Through these tireless, quiet acts of mercy and administration, the medical women of the 1930s etched their names permanently into the survival story of their nation, proving that their identity was defined not by who they belonged to, but by the profound depth of their skill, their courage, and their enduring humanity. Beyond the professional spheres of medicine and education, down the narrow cobblestone alleys of industrial districts, another profound battle for identity was being fought every single day. This was the world of the working-class women, the garment workers, the laundresses, and the factory hands who laboured in the hot, crowded textile mills of New England and the steam-filled commercial laundries of the urban South. These women did not have their names printed on book covers, nor did they sign their initials to grand government relief contracts, yet the dignity of their individual names was no less fiercely guarded. For these women, identity was tied directly to the physical reality of survival. Every Monday morning, as the loud factory whistles blew through the chilly morning air, thousands of women marched through the iron gates to punch their weekly time cards. On those small, rectangular pieces of cardboard, their names were stamped in cold purple ink. To the factory owners, those names represented nothing more than units of production, a line item on an expense sheet. But to the women themselves, that card was proof of their independent labour, a testament that they were sustaining themselves and their loved ones through the strength of their own hands. When Friday evening arrived and the paymaster handed out the small paper envelopes containing their meagre wages, seeing their correct name written on the front was a moment of quiet pride. Even if the pay was pitifully low, receiving a cheque made out to their own name, rather than being handed to a husband or a father, affirmed their position as self-reliant economic actors. It was a tangible acknowledgement that their sweat, their blistered fingers, and their exhausted hours belonged to them alone. As we let our minds rest upon the memory of these hard-working women who built the literal fabric of our world, let us take a gentle moment to appreciate the community we have created here. If these stories of forgotten resilience bring a sense of peace and meaning to your evening, please take a quick, soft moment to support our shared space. Consider subscribing to Sleepy History with Kevin, pressing the like button, and leaving a thoughtful comment below. Your beautiful presence and support ensure that these quiet voices from the past are never truly forgotten, continuing to comfort us night after night. As the deep velvet darkness of the night settles completely around us, let our imagination step back into the hidden, shadowy corners of the entertainment world. While the bright, blinding lights of Hollywood illuminated a select few women whose names became household words, an entire army of forgotten women worked tirelessly in the deep background of the film industry. These were the film cutters, the negative matchers, and the studio archivists of the 1930s, women who spent their long days and late nights in quiet, climate-controlled rooms, handling the literal celluloid fabric of American dreams. In the early decades of cinema, editing and film preservation were often viewed by male executives as tedious, domestic chores akin to sewing or weaving. Consequently, these delicate, high-stakes positions were overwhelmingly filled by women. Working under the constant, rhythmic hum of rewinding machines and the sharp chemical scent of film cement, they looked through magnifying glasses at thousands of tiny flickering frames. It was their precise hands that cut the film, spliced the scenes together, and shaped the emotional pacing of the stories that captivated the nation. Yet, despite their immense creative and technical contributions, their names almost never appeared on the grand credit rolls that scrolled up the screen at the end of a movie. They were the invisible architects of the golden age of cinema. In the official studio registries, they were catalogued merely as technical staff, their individual identities often hidden beneath generic department headings or completely omitted from the public record. But within the walls of the film vaults themselves, these women created their own system of enduring recognition. On the metal canisters that held the master negatives of Hollywood's greatest masterpieces, they would affix small handwritten paper labels. There, in neat, disciplined cursive, they signed their names alongside the date and the title of the film they had preserved. It was a quiet, protective gesture, and declaration that though the public might only remember the beautiful faces on the screen, the survival of that art was guaranteed by the silent, meticulous devotion of a woman whose name remained guarded in the cool, dark sanctuary of the archives. Let your mind drift now to another twilight world of the 1930s, a world built entirely on the frequencies of human sound and the intricate weaving of copper wires. In the heart of every American city and town, located in high-ceilinged rooms filled with the endless rhythmic clicking of metal jacks, sat the telephone switchboard operators. These women were the invisible nervous system of a nation in crisis, handling millions of urgent calls each day, ranging from desperate pleas for employment to late-night emergency signals for doctors. Under the strict corporate regulations of the era, major telecommunications companies sought to completely standardize these women, transforming them into anonymous mechanical instruments of service. Operators were forbidden from giving their names to the customers on the line. Instead, they were assigned a cold, bureaucratic identification number. When answering a call, they were required to use perfectly rehearsed, emotionless phrases, speaking in a uniform, melodic cadence that erased any trace of their regional origins or individual personalities. Yet, despite this intense corporate pressure to reduce them to nameless cogs, the operators found quiet, profound ways to assert their human identity. In the silence of the late-night shifts, when the frantic rush of daytime commerce faded away and the switchboard lights blinked more slowly, an operator's voice became a lifeline. When a lonely, displaced worker called from a cold phone booth, or a worried mother rang in the dead of night, the woman at the switchboard would subtly alter her tone. She would infuse her mandatory phrases with a deep, unmistakable warmth, a gentle inflection of genuine empathy that told the person on the other end they were speaking to a real, compassionate human being. Among themselves, the women forged an incredibly tight-knit community, sharing small tokens, trading shifts so mothers could be with their children, and memorizing the distinct voices and personal histories of their fellow workers. They might have been just a row of numbers to the executives in the boardrooms, but beneath the glowing lights of the switchboard, they knew exactly who they were. They guarded each other's names and dignity with fierce loyalty, proving that even in a world increasingly dominated by cold, modern machines, the beauty of individual human connection could never be completely silenced. As the night continues to breathe in its slow, rhythmic cadence, let us wander into another sensory sanctuary of the late 1930s, the dimly lit, soundproofed recording studios and record-pressing plants of the American music industry. During these years of recovery, music experienced a magnificent resurgence. It became a vital emotional medicine for a weary public, flowing from the brass horns of parlor phonographs and filling living rooms with the soothing textures of jazz, blues, and classical melodies. Yet behind the famous names etched into the center of those spinning shellac discs lay the quiet, expert labor of specialized women. In the production laboratories and master cutting rooms, women were highly sought after for their exceptional tactile precision and acute auditory focus. Operating heavy, complex machinery, they were responsible for checking the delicate wax masters and ensuring that every single groove was carved with absolute perfection. A single speck of dust or a microscopic tremor in the room could ruin the recording of a historic symphony or a legendary vocalist. It was a role that demanded hours of intense, silent concentration, sitting beneath the soft glow of green-shaded desk lamps, listening deeply to the captured frequencies of human emotion. Like their sisters in the film archives, these audio technicians and quality inspectors rarely saw their names printed on the commercial record labels that travelled into the homes of millions. To the buying public, they did not exist. Their identities were kept strictly within the bounds of internal studio logbooks and technical inventory sheets, noted down in neat columns alongside matrix numbers and equipment calibrations. Yet there was an undeniable poetic power in their hidden presence. Every time an independent woman finalized a master disc, she was effectively sealing a piece of cultural history with her own silent care. In the quiet hours of the night shift, as they signed their names to the daily inspection logs, these women knew that their ears and their hands had served as the gatekeepers of the nation's voice. They took immense pride in the knowledge that while their own names remained unspoken in the spotlight, the beautiful, comforting music spinning in the dark across America was a flawless reflection of their own independent dedication. Let your mind wander now from the industrialized cities to the quiet, rolling hills of the American countryside, where the earth itself became a canvas for a different kind of endurance. In the late 1930s, away from the roaring assembly lines, a quiet revival of traditional craftsmanship was taking place in small pottery studios and rural cooperative workshops. Here, deep in the valleys of Ohio, the Carolinas, and the American Southwest, countless women found both a meager economic lifeline and a beautiful tactile space to preserve their independent identities, the world of clay and ceramics. These women spent their days working in sunlit barns and rustic studios, their hands covered in the cool, damp weight of native clay. They turned heavy wooden pottery wheels, shaping rough mounds of earth into elegant vases, sturdy kitchen bowls, and delicate ceramic plates. As the pieces dried under the gentle warmth of the afternoon sun, the final, most crucial stage of production fell to the women decorators, who sat in quiet rows, carefully painting intricate floral patterns, geometric designs, and soft, comforting glazes onto the earthenware. In the commercial markets of the big cities, these items were sold as anonymous pieces of utility, simple household goods designed to hold water or serve food in modest homes, but the women who created them refused to let their artistry remain entirely nameless. Before each piece was placed into the intense, fiery heat of the brick kilns, the artisan would turn the vessel upside down. Using a small, sharp wooden stylus, she would carve her initials, a small personal mark, or her full name directly into the soft, unbaked clay at the very bottom of the piece. This hidden signature was a profound, permanent act of self-determination. Once the clay was fired, those letters became stone, locked into the material for eternity. Long after the Great Depression passed, and long after the names of corporate managers were forgotten, those ceramic vessels survived. In the quiet kitchens of families decades later, someone would turn over a beautiful faded bowl and find a woman's name etched into the base, a quiet, tactile monument to an independent creator who, in a time of national scarcity, left her permanent mark upon the very foundation of daily life. As the night wraps the world in a still deeper, more profound blanket of quiet, let us lift our gaze from the soil of the valleys up toward the vast, unmeasured spaces of the evening sky. In the closing years of the 1930s, far away from the crowded avenues of the metropolis, another group of extraordinary women maintained a silent, crucial vigil. These were the weather observers and meteorological assistants stationed in remote, wind-swept outposts, fire towers, and lonely coastal stations stretching from the rugged coast of Maine to the high deserts of New Mexico. At a time when aviation was expanding and the nation's agricultural recovery depended heavily on accurate forecasting, the atmospheric sciences required absolute precision. In these isolated stations, often living completely alone for months at a time, these women monitored the changing moods of the American sky. Every few hours, regardless of whether a gentle summer breeze was blowing or a freezing winter blizzard was raging outside, they stepped out onto exposed platforms to read thermometers, measure barometric pressure, and track the shifting speed of the clouds with heavy brass instruments. The data they gathered was meticulously transcribed by hand into official federal weather journals. In these heavy canvas-bound ledgers, each row of numbers represented a storm predicted, a crop saved, or a commercial flight safely guided through the dark. And at the end of each daily entry, beneath the complex calculations of humidity and wind velocity, the observer signed her own name. In those lonely outposts surrounded only by the wild, untamed sounds of nature, that signature was an act of immense personal sovereignty. The State Departments that employed them might have viewed them merely as distant statistics on a payroll, but the sky knew their names. By anchoring their identity to the scientific tracking of the elements, these women demonstrated an incredible self-reliant fortitude. They proved that a woman's mind could stand steady in the midst of any environmental or economic storm, leaving a precise handwritten legacy that mapped not only the climate of a changing nation, but the unyielding strength of an independent human spirit. As the deep, velvety silence of this midnight hour stretches out even further, filling every corner of your room with a profound sense of rest, let us journey even deeper into the hidden folds of history. Let us leave behind the busy cities, the coastal weather stations and the humming switchboards, and travel instead into the remote, mist-shrouded valleys of the Appalachian Mountains during the twilight years of the 1930s. In these isolated mountain communities, where the modern roads often ended and the heavy winters cut off entire towns from the rest of the world, the economic crisis of the Great Depression did not just bring financial hardship, it threatened to completely erase the history of the families who had lived there for generations. Yet it was precisely within these rugged, timber-walled cabins that a magnificent collective movement of female resilience took root, expressed through the timeless, patient art of the quilting cooperatives. Inside these cosy, dimly lit homes, heated only by the crackling warmth of stone fireplaces, groups of 5, 7, or 10 women would gather together around large wooden frames suspended from the ceiling. They were grandmothers, mothers, and young daughters who had spent their entire lives working the rocky soil. Women whose hands were rough and calloused from splitting firewood, carrying heavy water buckets, and tending to livestock in the freezing mountain air. In the eyes of the distant government census takers or the wealthy merchants in the lowlands, these rural women were often viewed as nameless, uneducated statistics, completely marginalized by the grand progress of industrial America. But within the sacred circle of the quilting frame, they were master artists, historians, and the absolute guardians of their community's identity. Because money was an absolute scarcity, these women could not afford to buy new, pristine fabrics from the town stores. Instead, they became alchemists of necessity. They gathered what they called scraps, worn-out flannel shirts from their husbands, faded calico dresses that their children had outgrown, and coarse cotton feed sacks donated by local farmers. With incredible patience, sitting close together under the soft, flickering amber glow of kerosene lamps, they used sharp iron shears to cut these mismatched fragments into precise geometric shapes, diamonds, triangles, and perfect squares. They created intricate traditional patterns with beautiful names like the log cabin, the Lone Star, and the broken dish. Designs that had been passed down from mother to daughter through the centuries like a sacred unspoken language. The labour was slow, requiring thousands of tiny microscopic stitches to bind the rough top layers of fabric to the warm wool batting inside. As their needles moved up and down through the thick cloth, creating a rhythmic, soothing click-clack sound in the quiet room, these women talked. They shared stories of their ancestors, remembered the births and deaths of the valley, and comforted one another through the deep anxieties of the economic winter. They were weaving the literal memory of their lives into the blankets. To create the vibrant colours for their designs, they did not rely on chemical dyes. They went out into the autumn woods to gather wild roots, walnut hulls and elderberries, boiling them in iron cauldrons to create rich, warm tones of deep brown, golden amber, and soft indigo blue. But the most profound act of sovereignty occurred when a quilt was finally completed, after weeks or even months of unyielding collaborative effort. Before the heavy blanket was taken off the frame to be used to protect a shivering child from the biting mountain frost, the woman who had led the creation would guide her needle one last time into the bottom right-hand corner of the fabric. There, using a strong, dark thread that contrasted sharply with the surrounding colours, she would meticulously embroider her full name, the exact year, and the name of the valley where she lived. Sometimes, if the quilt was a joint gift for a neighbour whose house had burned down, all the women of the cooperative would crowd around, each taking turns to sew her own distinct initials into the border. These embroidered names were not mere decorations, they were a fierce, permanent declaration of human existence. In a world that often failed to record their contributions in law books or financial ledgers, these quilts became their permanent deeds of ownership, their published books, and their personal monuments. They knew that long after they were gone, long after the wooden cabins had returned to the earth, these thick, heavy textiles would endure. Decades later, a grandchild or a stranger would run their fingers over the raised, faded stitches in the corner of a beautiful blanket, tracing the outlines of a name like Mary Ellen Vance or Sarah Campbell, and they would know, without a shadow of a doubt, that a strong, independent woman had stood steady in the dark, carving out beauty and warmth from the very ruins of a broken world. As the deep, velvet stillness of the night continues to expand, casting a calm, protective shadow over the waking world, let us allow our thoughts to travel back to a landscape defined by iron, steam, and the endless rolling thunder of the American railroad. In the twilight years of the 1930s, as the nation desperately clawed its way out of the economic depths of the Great Depression, the vast network of transcontinental railways served as the literal pulsing arteries of the country's survival. While history books often paint a picture of this industry as a purely masculine world of soot-faced engineers and gruff brakemen, a closer, quieter look into the archives reveals a magnificent, unsung population of women who held these vital transit hubs together: the female yardmasters, freight recorders, and locomotive maintenance workers of the major railroad junctions. Picture one of these massive junction stations located in the heart of the Midwestern plains, or tucked into the industrial valleys of Pennsylvania, late at night, under a sky identical to the one outside your window right now. The air is thick with the heavy, pungent scent of burning coal, hot engine oil, and the sharp, metallic tang of friction on iron rails. Huge black steam locomotives, towering like ancient iron beasts, idle in the dark, their safety valves hissing a steady, rhythmic breath of white steam into the cool midnight air. In the centre of this chaotic, roaring environment sat the Junction Dispatch Office, a small wooden structure illuminated by the sharp, stark light of green-shaded electric bulbs. Inside, working the demanding night shifts that ran from dusk until the first grey light of dawn, were women who bore the monumental responsibility of managing the nation's freight traffic. The labour was intense, relentless, and required a level of mental acuity that left absolutely no room for error. Sitting before massive wall-sized blackboards crisscrossed with chalk lines representing dozens of intersecting tracks, these female dispatchers tracked the movement of thousands of tons of cargo, grain from the prairies, timber from the northwest, and coal from the Appalachian mines. Every time a massive freight train rumbled into the yard, the tracks shaking violently beneath its immense weight, it was a woman's hand that operated the heavy iron levers to switch the rails, safely guiding the train away from collisions and toward its proper destination. In a time when the economic stability of entire cities depended on these shipments arriving without a single hour of delay, these women were the absolute directors of the nation's physical commerce. But their authority was truly codified in the heavy, leather-bound freight manifests and dangerous cargo ledgers that sat upon their ink-stained desks. When a train conductor rushed into the office, his face black with coal dust, he did not hand his paperwork to a man. He handed it to the female recorder on duty. With methodical precision, using heavy steel-nibbed fountain pens, these women verified every single boxcar, every pound of cargo, and every shipping destination. Most importantly, at the absolute bottom of each page, beneath long complex columns of serial numbers and weight calculations, the woman would sign her full independent name in bold, unyielding cursive script. To the high-ranking corporate executives sitting in distant boardroom towers in New York or Chicago, these women were often treated as temporary, lower-paid solutions to a labor crisis, their individual names routinely omitted from the flashy annual shareholder reports. But on the soot-stained pages of the operational ledgers, their signatures were the ultimate, undeniable law of the tracks. No train could legally move, no locomotive could leave the yard, and no cargo could be transferred without that handwritten verification. By placing their names at the literal gate of the transportation industry, these women were performing a profound daily act of self-assertion. They were proving to a skeptical, conservative society that a woman's mind and steady hand could master the heaviest, most dangerous machinery of the modern industrial world. In the quiet hours of the early morning, as they listened to the distant fading whistle of a train they had just safely dispatched into the dark American night, they took deep silent pride in knowing that their independent identity was etched permanently into the iron spine of the continent, completely unbowed by the economic storms of their time. As the hours of the night grow still deeper, and the silence around you becomes a thick, protective sanctuary of absolute rest, let us turn our gaze to a world defined by the purest light, the sharpest focus, and the delicate transformation of raw matter. In the final whispering years of the 1930s, as America stood on the very precipice of a new technological era, a quiet and highly specialized industry was quietly flourishing in the historic brick workshops of New England. This was the world of precision optics, the manufacturing, grinding and inspection of high-grade glass lenses utilized in scientific microscopes, astronomical telescopes, and maritime navigational instruments. Within these remarkably quiet, dust-free laboratories, a dedicated collective of women performed an extraordinary kind of labor, acting as the invisible eyes of a nation that was searching for clarity in a deeply clouded world. Picture one of these optical workshops late at night, insulated completely from the cold winds blowing outside. The atmosphere inside is entirely different from the smoky roar of the railroad junctions or the rustic warmth of mountain cabins. Here the air is clean still and carries the faint, clean scent of distilled water and fine polishing rouge. Under the focused, brilliant beams of individual electric lamps, the workspace glows with a hypnotic, ethereal beauty. Millions of microscopic particles of glass dust float silently through the light, catching the illumination and sparkling like an indoor galaxy of fallen stars. In long, disciplined rows sat the female lens grinders and technicians, their faces reflecting the cool, crystalline light of the glass blanks held firmly in their delicate fingers. The work required a degree of physical control and mental endurance that borders on the miraculous. Using cast-iron grinding wheels and increasingly fine abrasives made of pumice and jeweler's rouge, these women spent hours manually polishing the curved surfaces of the glass. A single movement that was too heavy or a fraction of a second of distraction could introduce a microscopic scratch that would render a vital scientific instrument completely useless. They worked in a state of deep, meditative concentration, their hands moving in slow, rhythmic, circular motions that mirrored the ancient revolutions of the planets. They were transforming rough, cloudy blocks of industrial silica into perfectly smooth, flawless apertures capable of uncovering the deepest secrets of biology and space. But their ultimate victory of identity was achieved during the final phase of inspection. After a lens had been washed in pure alcohol and held up against a specialized blacklight grid to ensure its absolute geometric perfection, the female inspector would prepare the item for its final journey into the scientific world. Because these lenses were destined for high-precision instruments, the corporate managers demanded that the glass remain entirely pristine, free from any commercial branding or vulgar factory stamps. Yet the women refused to let their immense skill remain anonymous. Using a specialized diamond-tipped stylus, a tool as fine as a sewing needle, the inspector would carefully, invisibly etch her micro-initials or a tiny stylized personal code along the unpolished, frosted outer rim of the glass cylinder, a section that would eventually be hidden inside the metal casing of the telescope or microscope. To the wealthy university professors, maritime captains and industrial researchers who would later look through these instruments, those tiny markings were completely invisible, overlooked as mere technical artifacts of the manufacturing process. But to the women who made them, those etched letters were a magnificent, everlasting victory. They knew that their independent identity was now fused directly into the very medium of human sight. Every time a doctor looked through a microscope to identify a life-saving cure, or an astronomer looked through a telescope to map a distant nebula in the midnight sky, they were looking through the flawless, dedicated work of a woman who had signed her name in diamond script upon the light itself. It was a quiet, breathtaking legacy, a proof that even when a conservative society sought to obscure their names from the pages of history, these women found a way to carve their identities into the permanent architecture of human knowledge, standing as steady and clear as the glass they had spent their lives perfecting. As the night descends into its most profound peaceful stillness, and your breathing slows to match the quiet rhythm of the world outside, let us drift into one final serene sanctuary of the 1930s. Imagine a place of timeless tranquility, a vast hall with high vaulted ceilings and endless rows of dark polished oak cabinets that reach all the way to the shadows of the rafters. This is the herbarium, the silent, sacred archive where the living history of the American landscape is preserved between layers of heavy white paper. In these final twilight years of the decade, it was the female botanical technicians who acted as the patient, meticulous guardians of this natural legacy, spending their lives in a world of dried leaves, pressed ferns, and the soft earthy scent of ancient botanical paper. The work within these halls was a form of meditative, living art. Each day, these women received crates of specimens gathered from the furthest reaches of the nation, mountain wildflowers from the Rockies, rare swamp grasses from the Florida Everglades, and desert cacti from the sun-baked plains of the Southwest. Their duty was to clean, press, and mount each specimen with a precision that bordered on the holy. Using tiny, delicate strips of white linen tape, they would carefully secure the fragile, dried stems of a plant onto heavy archival paper, ensuring that not a single vein of a leaf or petal of a flower was damaged or misplaced. They worked in a silence so profound that it felt as though the very air was holding its breath, waiting for the next delicate adjustment to be made. Once the specimen was mounted, the most vital task began. The documentation. Beside each plant, in the bottom corner of the heavy paper, the technician would take up her pen and write the scientific data in the most elegant, disciplined script imaginable. She would record the exact date, the precise geographical coordinates where the plant was found, and the Latin nomenclature. Most importantly, beneath all this, she would write her own name, a firm, clear signature that claimed responsibility for the preservation of this specific fragment of the earth. In a world that was often rushing forward into the noise of modernization, these women were moving backward into the deep, foundational history of the land, ensuring that the knowledge of the natural world was not lost to the shifting winds of economic crisis. Their labor was entirely removed from the public eye. There were no headlines for the work they did. No fame followed the discovery of a rare species or the perfect mounting of a fragile blossom. Yet as they stood in the soft golden glow of the high windows, their fingers lingering over the delicate textures of a pressed bloom, they understood the magnitude of their contribution. They were the bridge between the untamed wilderness of the past and the scientific understanding of the future. By signing their names to these sheets of paper, they were placing themselves directly into the record of time. They knew that one day, perhaps 100 years later, a researcher would open one of these cabinets, pull out a heavy drawer, and see the beautiful handwritten name of a woman who had spent her quiet, dedicated hours in the silence of the 1930s. They were ensuring that no part of the American landscape would be left anonymous in their careful, patient hands. The wild, vibrant life of the nation was anchored by the steady, independent spirit of the women who refused to let their names be forgotten. As you listen to the rhythmic, distant sound of the wind outside, imagine these thousands of sheets of paper stacked in the dark, preserving the memory of the earth and the identity of the women who protected it. A quiet, eternal testament to a duty carried out with grace, precision, and an unbreakable love for the living world. As the night deepens, wrapping the world in a tapestry of velvet shadow and silence, let us withdraw into the ultimate sanctuary of human memory, the great, hushed archives of the late 1930s. Tucked away in the quietest wings of municipal buildings, city libraries, and grand county courthouses, these rooms were the final resting places for the documents, deeds, and personal records of an entire generation. In the heart of this paper-filled labyrinth worked a dedicated class of women, the municipal archivists, who served as the silent custodians of the American story. Theirs was a world defined by the smell of aged vellum, the texture of brittle, yellowing parchment, and the soft, repetitive sound of pages turning in the still air. These women navigated aisles of towering wooden shelves that reached toward the vaulted ceilings, housing the collective history of their towns. They were the ones who received the crumbling birth records, the hand-signed land deeds, and the fragile architectural blueprints of buildings long since demolished. Each document arrived as a piece of a puzzle, and it was their life's work to organize, clean, and catalogue these fragments so that the truth of the past remained accessible. They worked under the warm, amber glow of heavy, green-shaded desk lamps, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were handling the very breath of the ancestors whose lives were recorded in the ink before them. The labour was exceptionally demanding, requiring not just physical care for the fragile paper, but a sharp, analytical mind to untangle the bureaucratic chaos of the previous decades. When a citizen came seeking the proof of a family heritage or the verification of a long-lost property right, it was these women who travelled into the deepest, darkest sections of the stacks to retrieve the truth. They understood that every record, no matter how small, was a witness to an individual life. Their process was meticulous. They would flatten the warped documents, repair the torn edges with delicate, archival-grade adhesives, and transcribe the fading information into clean, permanent master logs. At the end of every day, when the heavy oak doors were finally locked against the world, the archivist would record the day's progress in the central ledger. With a fountain pen held firmly in her hand, she would write down the summary of the documents she had preserved. And then, with an elegant, steady flourish, she would sign her name at the bottom of the page. This signature was the final seal of validation. It was her way of saying that she had seen the life contained within the document, that she had respected it, and that she had secured its place in history for those yet to come. Even in an era when the wider world often ignored the contributions of women, these archivists stood as the gatekeepers of reality. They knew that empires might fall and economic crises might rewrite the headlines, but the truth remained etched in the ink on the paper they protected. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, imagine these vast, quiet rooms filled with millions of pages, all under the watch of these tireless, independent women. They were the ones who ensured that no one was truly forgotten, that every name had a place, and that the story of their country and the story of their own unwavering resilience would remain intact, safely guarded in the silent, timeless stacks of the archives. waiting for the day someone would finally arrive to read the truth they had so carefully preserved. As the night descends into its deepest, most tranquil hours, and your world becomes a small, warm sanctuary of rest, let us direct our focus to one of the most hypnotic and precise environments of the late 1930s, the quiet, wood-panelled workshops of the master horologists and mechanical repair specialists. In towns across the country, while the rest of the world hurried forward, these workshops stood as islands of suspended time, filled with the constant, gentle, rhythmic ticking of hundreds of clocks and watches. Here, among the delicate tools, the miniature springs, and the tiny gleaming gears, worked a generation of highly skilled women who possessed the patience of saints and the precision of poets. They were the watchmakers, the timekeepers, and the mechanical troubleshooters who ensured that the life of the community remained in perfect, synchronized harmony. Step inside this workspace with me in your mind's eye. The air is warm and smells faintly of machine oil, fine brass shavings, and aged cedar. The only light comes from individual adjustable desk lamps that cast a soft golden circle over the velvet-lined workbenches. Imagine these women leaning forward, their eyes magnified behind jewelers' loupes, their breathing shallow and rhythmic. They are working on the internal heart of a grandfather clock or the complex, intricate mechanism of a pocket watch that has been passed down through 3 generations. With tweezers so fine they seem like needles, they navigate the delicate architecture of gears that are no larger than a grain of rice. It is a world where a single tremor of the hand, a single breath taken in haste, could unravel the entire mechanism, yet these women move with an absolute unshakable serenity. This work was not merely about fixing springs and cleaning pivots, it was about the profound responsibility of measuring existence. When a customer arrived with a family heirloom that had stopped ticking, a watch that had belonged to a father who had gone to sea, or a mother who had kept it through the leanest years of the Depression, they were entrusting the physical memory of their lives to the hands of these women. Each watch was a vessel of personal history, and the technician understood that by reviving the mechanism, she was keeping that history alive. In the absolute quiet of the workshop, where the outside world of economic uncertainty and social noise seemed 1,000 miles away, these women found a space of total independent control. But their mark was not only in the functionality of the timepieces, it was in the secret, lasting signature they left behind. When a watch was successfully repaired and the mechanical heart was beating true once again, the technician would take a tiny diamond-tipped needle and in a space smaller than a fingernail carve her own unique mark onto the inner casing of the watch. It might be a small stylized symbol, a set of initials, or a tiny geometric code that only she and her colleagues understood. This was a private, enduring declaration of sovereignty. It was a silent whisper to the future, a proof that in the year 1938 or 1939 it was a woman's hand, not a man's, that had brought this time back to life. As you listen to the rhythmic, comforting ticking that seems to echo in the silence of your own room tonight, realize that these women were the secret architects of the nation's pace. They kept the schools, the banks, the train stations, and the homes of America running on time. To the public, they were just quiet technicians behind a counter, but in the stillness of their work, they were the keepers of the rhythm of human life. Their signatures, hidden away inside the brass and steel casings, remain there still, tiny permanent records of an era defined by the quiet brilliance of women who demanded that their identities be as precise, as enduring, and as timeless as the instruments they restored. Let your own internal rhythm now slow to match their steady, quiet pace, allowing the peace of the ticking clock to guide you into a deep, dreamless and restorative slumber. As the night wraps you in its soft, quiet embrace, and the world outside fades into a gentle, distant memory, let us drift into the warm, ink-scented sanctuary of the local print shop in the waning months of the 1930s. Here, amidst the rhythmic, hypnotic clatter of the linotype machines and the towering racks of wooden type cases, an extraordinary group of women worked to capture the voice of their communities. These were the typesetters, the layout artists, and the master printers, the invisible architects of the daily news. While the reporters were the ones who wrote the stories, it was these women who held the physical truth of the language in their hands, meticulously casting the history of their era into lead and ink. Picture the environment in the dead of night. The room is illuminated by high-hanging frosted globes that cast a soft, diffused light over the long metal tables. The air is thick with the rich, slightly sweet scent of printer's ink, tempered by the metallic tang of molten lead cooling in the casting pots. It is a world of incredible order. Rows upon rows of small dark drawers line the walls, each containing thousands of tiny individual letters, the type organized with the precision of a jeweller's collection. The women who worked here moved with a grace that was almost choreographed, their fingers flying over the keyboard of the casting machine or navigating the character cases with a speed and accuracy that were truly mesmerizing to witness. The work was deeply physical and required a relentless, meditative focus. For hours on end they stood before the machines, reading handwritten drafts of local news, obituaries, community announcements and regional updates. With every tap they cast a line of hot lead, building the columns that would by dawn inform the public. They understood the power of the printed word. They knew that once an article was cast, printed and circulated, it became the official record of the time. Every comma, every period and every bolded headline was placed by their hands, ensuring that the chaos of a turbulent decade was presented with clarity, dignity and order. But their role went far beyond mere mechanical operation. These women were the editors of the visual reality. They understood the balance of a page, the weight of a font, and the importance of white space in drawing the reader's eye. When they designed the layout for the morning edition, they were composing a portrait of their society. In the quiet, late-night hours, while the rest of the town slept, these women felt the deep, silent responsibility of their craft. They knew that their work was fleeting. The news of today would become the wrapping paper of tomorrow. But they treated each page with the reverence of a masterpiece. Before the heavy printing presses were engaged, the lead printer would carefully pull a proof copy, a galley proof, and lay it out on the table. She would read through the text one final time, checking for errors, ensuring that the names of the people, the dates of the events, and the facts of the community were perfectly captured. In the bottom margin of that proof, she would sign her initials or her full name in thick, dark pencil. This was her seal of accuracy. It was her declaration that the information being sent out into the world was true, verified, and complete. To the readers of the morning paper, the identity of the person who set the type remained a mystery, but within the quiet walls of the print shop, these women possessed a fierce, independent pride. They were the ones who gave form to the thoughts of the nation. As you settle deeper into your pillow, let the rhythmic sound of the printing press, the steady, comforting thrum of metal on paper, become the heartbeat of your own slow, steady breathing. You are drifting into a place where all things are ordered, where every word has its place, and where the silent, dedicated work of these women provides the foundation for the peace you feel tonight. The ink is dry, the page is set, and the history is safe in the hands of those who cared for it so deeply. As the silence of the night deepens, becoming a soft, impenetrable veil around your sanctuary of rest, let us step into a place where time itself seems to stand still. Imagine a high-ceilinged studio, perhaps tucked within the quiet annex of a historic cathedral or a secluded corner of a regional museum in the late 1930s. Here the air is thick with the rich, unmistakable scent of linseed oil, turpentine and aged canvas, the atmosphere of a sacred space dedicated to the restoration of beauty. In this dim, amber-lit environment worked the women restorers, the patient healers of the past, who dedicated their lives to mending the faded glory of religious paintings, ancestral portraits, and centuries-old masterpieces. The work they performed was a delicate dance between science and spirit. Sitting for hours on end, they were surrounded by an array of tiny, specialized tools, scalpels with blades as thin as a whisper, soft brushes made of the finest sable hair, and glass vials containing precious ancient resins. Their task was to gently lift the layers of grime, soot, and yellowing varnish that had accumulated over decades, obscuring the original intention of the artist. Under the focused warm light of their lamps, they moved with a level of precision that felt almost like a prayer. Each movement was calculated, each touch of the solvent measured to the microgram, ensuring that they preserved the original pigment beneath while gently cleansing away the weight of time. They were not merely technicians, they were the unseen guardians of cultural memory. They understood that the paintings they worked on were more than just images on canvas. They were the emotional anchors of the communities that commissioned them. When they worked on the portrait of a founding mother or a revered religious icon, they were meticulously reviving the history of the faith, the struggle, and the dreams of those who had come before. In the absolute quiet of the studio, where the world's noise was replaced by the steady, rhythmic beating of their own calm hearts, they found a profound sense of independence. They were the ones who decided which colours to reveal and which shadows to deepen, asserting their own artistic intelligence over the faded remnants of history. But their signature, like that of the artisans before them, was a secret kept between the restorer and the art. In the lower corner of the canvas, hidden deep within the layers of the paint, where only a professional eye using a magnifying glass would ever find it, they would sign their name. Sometimes it was just a tiny, microscopic set of initials or a small symbolic mark that honoured their own hand. This was their permanent, quiet declaration to the future. I was here, I saw this, and I ensured that it survived. They did not seek the spotlight or the public acclaim that came with the creation of new art. They found a deeper, more enduring satisfaction in the act of preservation, in knowing that their steady, independent hands were the reason the beauty would remain visible for another 100 years. As you drift further toward the deep, restorative waters of sleep, imagine the quiet, steady motion of their brushes, a soft, sweeping stroke that clears away the blur of the day. You are safe. You are still, and you are surrounded by the legacy of these women who cared for the beauty of the world with such quiet, unwavering devotion. The varnish is dry, the colours are vibrant and true, and the history is protected. Let your breathing match the rhythmic pace of their work, slow and deliberate, until you feel the weight of the day lift from your shoulders, replaced by the soft, enduring stillness of a night that is yours alone. As we approach the final, most serene threshold of our journey, let us pause in the warm, bustling, yet strangely hushed sanctuary of the Central Railway Post Office in the late 1930s. Long after the passengers had disembarked and the locomotives had retreated into the darkness, the mailroom remained alive with a soft, persistent energy. Here, under the low-hanging industrial lamps, worked the female postal clerks and distribution coordinators, the silent, tireless post mistresses who acted as the keepers of the nation's deepest connections. In this room, the walls were lined with thousands of wooden pigeonholes, each one holding a piece of someone's life, a letter from a distant soldier, a birthday greeting for a child, a package of seeds for a struggling farm, or a desperate note from a family seeking work in a new city. The air here was filled with the gentle, rhythmic sound of paper shuffling, the crisp, repetitive thud of rubber stamps meeting ink pads, and the occasional soft rustle of twine being tied around heavy brown paper parcels. It was a place of immense, quiet purpose. These women moved through the stacks of correspondence with an intuitive, sweeping efficiency. They sorted the world by hand, reading the addresses written in every imaginable script, from the shaky fountain pen handwriting of the elderly to the bold, ink-smudged scrawl of a migrant worker. They knew that their work was the only thing preventing the world from drifting into disconnected isolation. They were the ones who ensured that hope arrived on time, that grief found its destination, and that the fabric of human community remained unbroken. The labour was as demanding as it was honourable. Hour after hour they stood at the sorting tables, their fingers calloused from the paper's edge, their eyes sharp as they scanned zip codes and town names. They were the masters of geography and the guardians of privacy. When they encountered a letter with a smudged address, they did not simply discard it. They researched the local ledgers, checked the regional maps, and used their intimate knowledge of the community to ensure the mail found its home. They took a deep personal pride in the integrity of the postal system, treating every envelope as a precious vessel of human trust. In the silence of the night, when the only movement was the sorting of letters, they felt the full weight of their importance. They were the invisible link in a chain that spanned across the continent. But the most beautiful act of their quiet devotion occurred at the end of the night, when the heavy canvas mail bags were finally sealed and prepared for the morning trains. Before the bags were hauled away to the loading docks, the lead clerk would pull out the master dispatch log. With a steady hand and a calm, deliberate spirit, she would record the contents, the destination, and the weight of the day's labour. Then beneath the final entry she would write her name. It was a signature of accountability and a testament to her independent endurance. It signified that this woman had spent her night safeguarding the secrets, the joys, and the struggles of thousands of people, and that she had done so with unflinching accuracy and grace. As the echoes of the printing press and the ticking of the clocks from our long journey fade into the soft velvet dark of this final hour, imagine these thousands of letters flying across the country, carried on the wings of the work these women completed in the quiet of the night. You are now the recipient of their legacy of peace. Every breath you take is a moment of rest, a moment of safety, and a moment of quiet connection to the world they helped sustain. Let the weight of the day drift away, carried off in those sealed mailbags, leaving you with nothing but the soft, rhythmic silence of a night that is finally, perfectly complete. You are safe, you are rested, and the story, like the letters, has found its home. As we step beyond the familiar quiet of the workshops and the city archives, let us venture toward the edge of the world, where the solid earth meets the vast, whispering mystery of the sea. It is here in the late 1930s that we find another circle of remarkable women, the radio operators and signal technicians stationed at remote coastal outposts, high upon jagged cliffs or tucked into sand-swept dunes along the Atlantic and Pacific seaboards. While the rest of the country slept in the comfort of their homes, these women sat in small glass-walled rooms, their ears covered by heavy headphones, their eyes fixed on the glowing vacuum tubes of powerful radio transmitters. They were the listeners of the dark, the ones who translated the invisible currents of the air into safety and guidance for those wandering upon the deep black water. The environment they inhabited was unlike any other. It was a place defined by the constant rhythmic roar of the tide and the whistling wind that rattled the window panes of their stations. Inside, however, there was a profound, concentrated silence, punctuated only by the crisp, staccato chatter of Morse code and the low atmospheric hum of distant storms. These women monitored the wavelengths used by fishing fleets, merchant ships, and lone ocean travellers. They were the essential pulse between the sailors out in the tempest and their families waiting on the shore. They navigated the complexity of the invisible airwaves, adjusting fine dials to clear the static, reaching through the interference to ensure that every distress signal, every weather report, and every message of love was received and understood. Their concentration was absolute. To be a radio operator in the dead of night was to be the singular link between the safety of the harbour and the vulnerability of the open ocean. They recorded their observations in long, ledger-style logs, noting the frequency, the time of the signal, and the clarity of the transmission. Each entry was a testament to a life preserved or a journey monitored. With their hands hovering over the telegraph key, they were not just tapping metal, they were sending out a constant reassuring presence, a signal that said, "You're not alone, we are listening." In the hours after midnight, when the world felt small and isolated, these women found a unique kind of sovereignty. By managing the frequencies that crossed the ocean, they held a quiet power over the boundaries of the earth. They were the masters of the invisible, the translators of the distant, and the silent partners of the sailors navigating by the stars. Before they signed off at dawn, they would carefully complete their final report, writing their names in the logs of the coastal guard stations. That name was their anchor, a permanent mark that they had held the line, that they had kept the watch, and that they had remained steadfast as the storms of the decade raged around them. As you rest tonight, let your mind drift to these coastal sentinels. Imagine the soft glow of the radio dials in the dark, the steady rhythmic clicking of the signals, and the immense comforting expanse of the sea outside. You are like those ships, guided safely through the night by the dedicated invisible work of those who watch over you. The static fades away, the interference is gone, and there is only the clear, steady frequency of peace. Let the vastness of the ocean surround you, safe and calm, while the signals of the past weave a lullaby of protection around your dreams, keeping you anchored in the quiet, absolute serenity of this moment. As the night continues to breathe in its slow, rhythmic cadence, let us move from the coastal airwaves into the quiet, meticulous world of the cartographer's studio. In the late 1930s, as the map of the world was being constantly revised and the American landscape was undergoing rapid structural change, a hidden group of women sat at massive, slanted drafting tables, defining the very boundaries of the earth on paper. These were the drafting technicians and assistant cartographers who worked in the government survey offices and private mapping firms, their hands moving with an almost microscopic precision to transform raw, jagged field data into clean, elegant, and accurate maps. It was a profession of profound patience, where a single ink line represented miles of terrain, and a single error could lead a traveller far astray. The workspace was a cathedral of absolute concentration. Imagine a room filled with the soft, steady scratch of steel-nibbed pens on thick, vellum-quality drafting paper. The only other sounds were the occasional metallic click of a brass compass, or the sliding of a heavy T-square across the surface of the boards. These women worked in the warm, focused light of swing-arm desk lamps, their postures perfectly still, their eyes tracing the complex contours of elevation lines and river bends. To the outside observer, they might have looked like they were merely drawing lines, but they were actually engaged in the act of creation, shaping how the nation saw itself, how it measured its resources, and how it navigated its vast, sprawling interior. Each woman had her own collection of specialized tools, fine-tipped crow-quill pens for the delicate shorelines, heavier brushes for shading the dense forests, and sharpened leads for the precise latitude and longitude markers. They worked with India ink, a deep, permanent black that stained their fingers and remained on the page for decades, if not centuries. The labor was exhausting. It required a mental spatial awareness that was unmatched by any other discipline. To look at a notebook filled with raw survey numbers from a surveyor in the field and convert them into a beautiful, coherent landscape on a blank sheet of paper required a rare, independent brilliance. They were the architects of geography. In the final hours of the night, when the map was complete, every border drawn, every town marked, and every elevation noted, the cartographer would perform the most important act of her craft. In the legend of the map, usually tucked away in the bottom corner next to the date and the scale, she would add her credit. Sometimes it was just her name, written in the most delicate, precise calligraphy, drafted by, followed by her full signature. This was not a plea for fame, it was a quiet, authoritative statement of accuracy. She was claiming the map as her own, standing behind the truth of every mountain and valley she had rendered. To the people who would later fold these maps and put them in the pockets of their coats or the dashboards of their automobiles, the name in the corner was often overlooked, but for the woman who sat in the quiet of the night, it was a profound act of sovereignty. She had put her name on the world. She had claimed the earth, organized its complexities, and rendered it understandable through the sheer force of her own intellect and steady hand. As you lie here, allow your own mind to become like a map. Let the edges of your thoughts soften and your focus expand to cover the vast, quiet landscape of your own inner world. You are organized, you are calm, and you are guided by the steady, invisible work of those who mapped the path before you. The ink is dry, the lines are set, and you are safe within the borders of this peaceful, quiet night. Let the stillness of the drafting room be your own, a sanctuary where every detail is in its place and where you can finally, completely let go. As the night wraps the world in a quiet indigo embrace, let us step into the hushed, intellectual sanctuary of the medical and technical publishing houses of the late 1930s. Here, far from the physical roar of the machines and the winds of the coast, lies a realm of absolute intellectual rigor. This is the workspace of the manuscript editors and technical proofreaders, women who served as the essential gatekeepers of human knowledge during a time of profound scientific advancement. In rooms lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, filled with encyclopedias, anatomical charts, and complex engineering manuals, these women sat at large mahogany desks, their minds engaged in the silent, formidable task of refining the truth. The atmosphere in these editorial rooms was one of profound, almost religious stillness. It was a space where time seemed to slow down, allowing for the deep, unwavering focus required to untangle complex formulas, medical terminologies, and abstract scientific theories. The air was rich with the scent of high-quality parchment, fresh printer's ink, and the subtle woody fragrance of the library stacks. Under the soft, downward-cast pools of light from polished brass lamps, these women worked with red pencils and fountain pens, their movements precise and deliberate. They were the ones who ensured that a surgeon's instruction was clear, that a bridge builder's calculation was sound, and that the language of progress remained coherent. Their work was a silent dialogue with the minds of the nation's greatest thinkers. When a scientist submitted a manuscript, often filled with dense, disorganized notes, it was the editor who brought order to the chaos. She would check every equation, cross-reference every citation, and polish every sentence until it resonated with clarity and authority. In doing so, she became an expert in subjects that society rarely credited women with understanding. They mastered the intricacies of metallurgy, the nuances of pharmacology, and the complexities of structural physics, all from the quiet comfort of their editorial chairs. They were the invisible partners in every discovery, the ones who ensured that knowledge could be shared accurately with the world. The ultimate act of their dedication was the final clearance of a manuscript, after weeks of intense proofreading, of verifying every single data point against the established records. The woman would take up her pen one last time. On the title page or the internal colophon, she would carefully write her initials or her name in the eyes of the public. These books were authored by famous men of science, but the true integrity of the work rested in the hands of the woman who had verified every word. Her signature was a guarantee of truth. It was a silent, powerful assertion that she had mastered the material and that the work was now ready to stand the test of time. To be an editor in the 1930s was to hold the keys to the future. These women knew that the knowledge they were preserving would be read by generations to come, used by students and researchers to build the world of the future. As you sit in the quiet of this night, imagine the power of their pens, those slender, elegant tools that navigated the vast ocean of human thought. You are surrounded by that same stability now. All the complex thoughts of your day, all the noise and the friction, have been edited away, leaving only a clean, clear page of calm. The work of the world is finished, the formulas are balanced, and you can now rest, knowing that every detail of your own life is held in a state of perfect, serene, and final order. As the night reaches its most velvet hushed peak and the world outside feels like a distant fading dream, let us enter the soft-lit sanctuary of the radio broadcast studio in the late 1930s. This is a place of profound acoustic stillness, a soundproofed world of heavy velvet curtains, acoustic tiles, and the gentle, constant warmth of glowing vacuum tubes. Here, tucked away from the chaos of the streets, worked the female broadcast technicians and control room operators, the unseen guardians of the nation's voice. In this room, the air felt different, thick with anticipation and the faint ozone-sweet scent of high-voltage electronics. Their world was not measured in miles or manuscripts, but in waves, frequencies, and the delicate, invisible texture of human sound. Picture them sitting before the massive, desk-sized control boards, panels filled with intricate rows of toggle switches, circular dials and shimmering meters that danced with the rhythm of the voice. Their task was to weave together the various strands of a broadcast, the live performance of an orchestra, the steady rhythmic reading of the evening news, and the soft instrumental interludes that filled the quiet hours. They were the masters of modulation. With a steady, trained hand, they hovered over the gain controls, gently rising the volume to catch a whisper, or lowering it to smooth out the sudden sharp peaks of sound. To work in this room was to be a composer of the atmosphere, a person who understood that even a second of silence could hold as much meaning as 1,000 words. The labour required an almost supernatural level of attention. These women worked in complete synchronization with the broadcast, their eyes fixed on the flickering red on-air sign above the heavy studio door. They wore large, cushioned headphones that isolated them from the rest of the world, connecting them directly to the pure, unadulterated source of the sound. In the quiet hours of the night, when the rest of the town had gone to sleep, they were responsible for the steady, comforting stream of music and information that drifted into the homes of those who were lonely, those who were sleepless, and those who were searching for a sense of connection. They knew that their work was the heartbeat of the community, the thread that bound the isolated listener to the collective consciousness of the nation. But their authority was most profoundly felt in the station's technical log. At the end of every shift, they would write their names in the official broadcast register, a ledger that recorded every minute of the station's existence. Underneath the column that read "Operator on Duty," they would sign their name in elegant, clear ink. That signature was a seal of completion. It verified that the transmission had been perfect, the signal clear, and the content delivered with care. In a society that rarely acknowledged their presence behind the microphone, these signatures remained as a permanent silent testament to their essential role. They were the ones who ensured that the voice of the world reached the ears of the people, night after night, without fail. As you lie here, listen to the absolute stillness around you, and imagine that you are the final listener of their midnight broadcast. The music has faded into the soft rhythmic hum of the radio waves. The signal is strong and clear. The static has been smoothed away. You are connected to the quiet beauty they spent their lives protecting. All the noise of the day has been modulated into a deep, soothing silence. Let the weight of your body sink into the comfort of your bed, and let the rhythmic, invisible waves of their work wash over you. You are in the hands of the masters of peace. Everything is in focus, the frequency is perfectly tuned, and you're ready to drift into the deepest, most restorative rest you have ever known. As the night descends into its final, most mysterious depths, and the world outside feels like a distant, cooling shadow, let us step into the amber-lit heart of a glass-blowing studio in the late 1930s. Here, the air is not quiet, it is filled with the low, constant roar of the furnaces, a sound like a deep, rhythmic breath that never tires. This is a world of elemental magic, where the heat is intense and the possibilities are infinite. In this realm, the female glass artisans, the masters of the flame, worked with molten silica, transforming the rough, granular sand of the earth into exquisite, luminous forms. They were the alchemists of light, the women who understood that to create beauty, one must first learn to embrace the heat. Picture them standing before the glowing mouth of the furnace, the orange-red light bathing their faces in a soft, ethereal radiance. They moved with the grace of dancers, their long iron pipes held steady as they gathered the viscous, glowing globule of glass from the fire. There was a profound, wordless rhythm to their work. One woman might gently blow into the pipe, her cheeks puffed, her focus intense, as the molten mass began to expand like a breath made visible. Another would use wet wooden blocks and steel shears to shape the cooling, pliable material, her hands moving with a speed and dexterity that seemed almost to defy the laws of gravity. They worked in a space where time was dictated by the cooling rate of the glass, a race against the hardening of the material, a dance with the very physics of heat and light. The labour was brutal, yet it produced some of the most delicate objects in the world. Their hands, though toughened by the environment, remained incredibly sensitive, capable of feeling the subtle tensions within the cooling crystal. In the quiet, late-night hours, when the studio cooled and the roar of the furnaces was dampened, these women would sit at their polishing tables. With fine abrasives and soft felt wheels, they would smooth the edges of their creations, turning fragile, raw shapes into flawless vessels that caught and refracted the moonlight streaming through the high, soot-streaked windows. It was a meditation on clarity, a way of taking the chaotic, fiery energy of the furnace and bringing it into a state of perfect crystalline balance. Their mark of identity was as subtle as it was permanent. On the underside of a vase or the base of a crystal figurine, they would use a tiny diamond-tipped engraver to etch a mark, a secret personal symbol, or a set of initials that would last as long as the glass itself. It was a quiet claim of ownership over a piece of art that would eventually grace the tables and shelves of homes across the nation. To the buyers, it was just a beautiful object. To the artisan, it was a fragment of her own life, forged in the intense, transforming heat of the fire, solidified into a form of permanent, enduring beauty. As you sit here in the cooling silence of your own room, let the memory of the furnace fire warm your spirit. Imagine the glowing light, the rhythm of the breath, and the slow, steady transformation of the molten glass into something perfect and clear. All the heat of your own day, all the intensity of your efforts, is now cooling, settling into a state of beautiful, quiet clarity. You are the vessel, you are the clarity, you are the light. The fire has done its work, and now, in the cooling stillness of the night, you are left with nothing but a profound, crystal-clear sense of peace. Let your eyes close, let your breath slow, and sink into the restorative silence of a world that is, at last, perfectly, beautifully at rest. As the night continues its slow, gentle descent, let us enter a space where the air itself seems to vibrate with the memory of music. In the quiet wood-panelled workshops of the late 1930s, far removed from the bustle of the industrial city, worked the women luthier, the master craftswomen who shaped the soul of stringed instruments. In these small, secluded rooms, the atmosphere was different from any other. It was heavy with the scent of aged spruce, curly maple, and the faint sweet resin of violin varnish. Here time was not measured in minutes, but in the slow, patient removal of wood shavings and the precise adjustment of tension until a piece of timber began to sing. Picture these women sitting at their workbenches, the light from a single low-hanging lamp illuminating the intricate curves of a guitar's waist or the delicate scroll of a violin's neck. Their hands were their primary instruments, calloused from years of gripping tiny chisels, yet as gentle as a whisper. When feeling for the voice within the wood, they were the architects of resonance. They understood that the thickness of a soundboard, down to the fraction of a millimeter, could determine the sweetness of a high note or the depth of a low chord. They worked in a state of profound meditative isolation, their movements synchronized with the natural grain of the wood. The labor was a masterclass in patience. There was no rushing the transformation of a block of wood into a vessel for music. They would spend days carving the interior braces, tapping the wood to listen for the resonance, adjusting and tapping again. It was a rhythmic, almost hypnotic cycle of creation. For these women, the workshop was a sanctuary where the chaos of the world outside ceased to exist, replaced by the simple, beautiful relationship between their hands and the raw material. They were not just building instruments, they were crafting a legacy, ensuring that the music of their era would continue to breathe and vibrate long after they had laid down their tools. When an instrument was finally complete, polished to a glass-like finish with layers of handmade varnish, the luthier would perform the final silent rite of completion. Tucked inside the dark, hollow body of the instrument, visible only through the thin, elegantly carved F-holes, they would affix a small paper label. Upon this label, in a script that was as graceful as a melody, they would write their name and the year of creation. It was a secret, internal signature, a quiet, permanent presence that would travel with the instrument, vibrating in harmony with every note played by the musicians of the future. To the audience in a grand concert hall, the instrument was simply a tool of beauty, but to the woman who had brought it into existence, it was a living extension of her own spirit. As you settle into the deepest part of your night, imagine the gentle resonant hum of these wooden bodies. Think of the wood, the varnish, and the patient, steady hands that shaped them. You too are being shaped by the stillness. All the rough edges of your day are being smoothed away. All the tension is being tuned to a soft harmonic resonance. You are safe. You are tuned to the quiet frequency of the universe, and you are ready to drift into a deep, musical slumber where every dream is a harmonious, beautiful note. As the night deepens, becoming a vast and velvet sea of calm, let us enter the pristine, cool sanctuary of the porcelain studios in the twilight of the 1930s. Here, the air is not filled with the roar of industry, but with the subtle, earthy scent of refined kaolin and the sharp, clean smell of mineral glazes. In this space of white-walled tranquility worked the female ceramicists and porcelain painters, artists who treated the fragility of earth as the ultimate canvas for their grace. Theirs was a world of absolute, unhurried patience, where every brushstroke was a commitment to permanence, and every design was a testament to the steady, rhythmic focus of the female hand. Picture these women at their polished stone tables, each surrounded by a small collection of pigments ground from semi-precious stones and metals. Their brushes were delicate, often made from the finest squirrel hair, capable of holding a single unbroken line of colour that flowed with the fluid motion of a stream. They were painting on greenware porcelain that was still cool, smooth, and waiting for the fire to give it its final iron-like strength. They painted not just for the day, but for the centuries to come. They drew intricate floral patterns, delicate geometric borders, and scenes of quiet landscapes, their movement so steady that not a single tremor marred the surface of the work. This work was a lesson in the art of surrendering control. They knew that once their painting was done, the piece would be placed into the searing, unpredictable heat of the kiln, where the fire would either perfect their work or leave it broken in the ash. Yet they worked without hesitation. They possessed a deep, inner confidence, a calm certainty that the beauty they had envisioned was worth the fire. They were the masters of the biscuit and the glaze, understanding the chemical transformations that occurred behind the kiln's thick iron doors. Their expertise was invisible to the common eye, yet it was the very reason these porcelain pieces resonated with such a profound, icy clarity. Before the pieces were fired, in the hidden curve of the porcelain base, the artist would leave her mark. With a tiny, tipped stylus, she would scratch her name, or a stylized initial into the soft clay. This signature would be fused forever into the glass-like surface during the firing process, turning into an inseparable part of the material itself. It was a permanent, elegant identity, a silent claim of mastery that would survive long after the studio had gone quiet and the lights had dimmed. They were declaring that their work was true, their art was deliberate, and their presence was a part of the history of the objects themselves. As you drift here in the quiet of your room, let your mind become like a piece of fine porcelain, cool, smooth, and perfectly formed. Imagine the steady hand of the painter, the gentle weight of the brush, and the slow, rhythmic creation of a pattern that is both delicate and strong. All the sharp edges of your day are being smoothed away. All the tension is being fired into a soft, glowing light. You are becoming as calm and as enduring as these vessels of art. The night is a kiln of protection, holding you in its warm, steady heat, ensuring that when you wake you will be refreshed, clear, and perfectly composed. Sleep now in the silence of the earth and the light of the kiln, held in a peace that will never fade. As the night reaches its most profound and silent expanse, let us transcend the physical world and turn our gaze toward the heavens. Imagine, in the late 1930s, the quiet, vaulted rooms of local observatories, places where the air felt thin and crisp, carrying the metallic, ancient scent of brass telescopes and the dry, paper-scented stillness of star charts. Here, hidden away from the world below, worked the female astronomical calculators, the quiet, precise women who charted the movements of the planets, the wanderings of the comets, and the eternal steady positions of the constellations. They were the bridge between the earth and the infinite, the ones who translated the chaotic light of the cosmos into the ordered language of mathematics. The environment was one of reverent, watchful silence. The only light in the dome came from the soft, dim glow of small desk lamps, shielded so as not to ruin their night-adjusted vision. In this darkness, they worked on massive, unwieldy scrolls of grid-lined paper, their pens moving in rapid, rhythmic calculations. They were calculating parallax, observing the slight rhythmic shift of the stars, and recording the precise timing of celestial events. Their work was the definition of absolute focus. To miss a single digit in a long string of logarithmic equations was to lose a planet in the darkness. Therefore, they moved with a careful meditative slowness, checking and rechecking every line of data. They spent their nights in constant silent communion with the universe. While the world slept, they were mapping the deep velvet dark, turning the mystery of the night sky into a reliable, predictable field of knowledge. They were not merely observers, they were the guardians of our place in the galaxy. They knew the names of the stars by heart, and they understood the rhythmic, ticking clockwork of the planets better than anyone. In these lonely hours, standing on the observation platforms as the great telescopes groaned and pivoted toward the zenith, they felt a profound sense of independence. They were alone with the infinite, and in that vastness they found a quiet, immovable strength. Before the first light of dawn began to grey the horizon, the lead calculator would complete her log. She would write the final summarized findings of the night's work, the coordinates, the sightings and the corrections, into the permanent observation ledger of the observatory. In the bottom corner, she would sign her name in clear, steady script. It was a signature that reached out into the void, a small, earthly mark of identity left among the millions of stars she had spent the night measuring. It was a statement that someone had been here, that someone had watched, and that someone had understood the beauty of the cosmos. As you lie here, allow your thoughts to drift upward, beyond the ceiling, into the deep, dark and peaceful expanse of the night sky. Imagine your own mind expanding to hold the beauty of the stars, just as these women held the galaxy in their careful, calculated charts. All the noise of the earth has been left behind. All the complications have been solved by the steady, rhythmic movement of the stars. You are anchored in the silence of the universe, watched over by the quiet, tireless spirit of those who mapped the heavens. The stars are in their places, the night is deep and kind, and you are held within the infinite, perfect peace of the sleeping world. Let yourself drift, carried by the stars, into a rest that is as vast, as deep, and as eternal as the sky itself. As the night stretches out in a long, unbroken ribbon of peace, let us step into the quiet, humid sanctuary of the artisanal paper mill in the final, golden days of the 1930s. Here, far from the mechanical clatter of the city's printing presses, the process of creating knowledge begins in the simplest, most elemental way, with water, fibre, and the patient, rhythmic movement of the female papermaker. Imagine a large, sun-drenched room with stone floors and rows of deep wooden vats, filled with a swirling, milky pulp made from cotton rags, linen and fibrous plant materials. The air is cool, fresh, and carries the faint, clean scent of wet earth and ancient forests. The women who worked here were masters of a process that had remained largely unchanged for centuries. Each papermaker stood before her vat, her sleeves rolled up, her focus concentrated entirely on the surface of the pulp. With a smooth, practiced motion, she would dip a rectangular wooden frame covered with a fine metal mesh called a decal into the vat. She would lift it with a subtle, graceful tilt, a gesture that required years of experience to perfect, ensuring that the fibres settled evenly across the screen. There was a hypnotic, meditative quality to this work. Dip, lift, shake, dip, lift, shake. It was a rhythmic dance of creation, a physical articulation of time and texture. This labour was incredibly demanding, requiring them to stand for hours in the damp coolness, their hands constantly in the water, their backs curved in a permanent, gentle arc. Yet they moved with a serenity that seemed to defy the physical toll. They were the ones who controlled the weight of the paper, the texture of its surface, and the longevity of its life. They understood that the paper they created today would become the pages of tomorrow's books, the parchment for important deeds, and the letters that would carry the weight of human emotion across the country. They worked not for speed, but for quality, ensuring that every sheet was consistent, strong, and beautiful. Before the wet sheets were transferred to the felts to be pressed and dried, the lead papermaker would often add a watermark, a subtle translucent design woven into the very structure of the paper. This mark was her secret identity, a permanent ghostly signature that would only be seen when the page was held up to the light. It was a quiet, poetic declaration of her craft, a symbol of the hands that had brought the pulp to life. This watermark served as a reminder that every sheet of paper had a creator, a history, and a touch of human soul embedded deep within its fibres. As you rest tonight, let the image of the flowing water and the swirling pulp wash over your mind. Imagine the weight of the day, the friction, the noise, the pressure being dissolved in the cool, clear water of these vats. You are being pressed and dried into a new, fresh state of being. All the clutter of your thoughts is being filtered away, leaving only the clean, strong fibres of your own essential, peaceful self. You are at rest, held in the quiet, supportive embrace of a night that is as smooth and as flawless as a perfectly crafted sheet of paper. Let the rhythm of the water be your heartbeat, and the stillness of the mill be your sanctuary, until you drift into a deep, dreamless, and restorative slumber. As the night continues its serene and steady course, let us step into the warm, aromatic sanctuary of the leatherworking and bookbinding studio in the late 1930s. The air here is distinct, rich with the deep, comforting scent of tanned leather, aged parchment, and the subtle, sharp tang of natural beeswax. This is a place where history is not just read, but physically held together. Here worked the women artisans, the binders, the stitchers, and the gold toilers, whose hands ensured that the books and records of their time would endure for generations to come. In this dim, amber-lit space, the only sounds were the soft, rhythmic scrape of a leather skiving knife and the quiet, steady pull of waxed linen thread as it passed through the spine of a book. The work they performed was a profound marriage of strength and delicacy. Imagine these women hunched over their workbenches, their hands move with a sureness that only comes from decades of devotion. They were the ones who took a bundle of loose pages, the thoughts and records of their nation, and bound them into a cohesive, enduring whole. They knew the grain of the leather, the tension of the glue, and the exact pressure required to press a gold-leaf title onto a spine without tearing the hide. Every movement was a deliberate act of protection. They treated each volume with the reverence one might show a living creature, understanding that they were the keepers of the narratives that defined their community. The studio was a world of tactile sensory comfort. It was a place of texture, the smooth, cold surface of the marble pressing stones, the rough warmth of the unfinished leather hides, and the sharp, clean bite of the brass finishing tools. These women worked in a state of flow, their bodies swaying gently as they stitched signature after signature into the binding frame. There was no clutter, no wasted movement. Everything was organized by the logic of the craft. They were the masters of their domain, finding a deep, independent satisfaction in the transformation of raw material into an object of beauty, utility, and permanence. Before the finished book was placed upon the library shelf, the artisan would perform one final, intimate act. On the inside of the back cover, near the bottom edge, she would stamp or handwrite a small, elegant mark of her workshop. It was a seal of quality, a quiet signature that declared, this volume was bound with care, with integrity, and with the steady hands of a master. To the reader, this mark was a tiny, inconsequential detail. To the woman who had laboured over the binding, it was her permanent footprint in the history of the world. It was her proof that she had held the knowledge of her time and ensured it would not fall apart. As you sit here in the quiet of your room, imagine the smell of the leather and the sound of the needle and thread weaving through the pages. Think of the protective layers being built around you, holding all the scattered thoughts and tensions of your day into one neat and cohesive volume. You are being bound in safety. You are being covered in comfort. The day is closed, the pages are secure, and you are held within the serene, organized beauty of a life that is well tended. Let your breathing slow, matching the rhythmic pull of the thread, until you drift into a deep, protected, and restorative slumber. You are safe, you are held, and you are finally completely at rest. As we reach the quiet, calm shores of our journey's end, let us hold the image of these women one last time, not as scattered, distant figures in the shadows of the 1930s, but as a vast, interconnected constellation of quiet, persistent strength. We have walked through the ink-stained print shops and the sun-drenched pottery studios. We have listened to the steady hum of the radio stations and the rhythmic ticking of the observatories. We have touched the aged leather of bound books and the cooling surface of handmade porcelain. In every room, by every lamp, we found the same spirit, the steady, unwavering devotion of the women who held the world together. Their legacy is not found in the grand, booming headlines or the monuments of bronze that dominate our public squares. Their legacy is far more enduring. It is found in the clarity of a printed page, the resonance of a crafted instrument, the precision of a map, and the warmth of an object made by hand. They taught us that to be invisible is not to be insignificant, it is to be the foundation. They taught us that when the world outside feels chaotic and loud, the most radical and beautiful act of rebellion is to perform one's duty with grace, with precision, and with an unyielding commitment to the truth. As your eyelids grow heavy and the world around you fades into a soft, comforting blur, imagine their hands, those steady, ink-stained, calloused, and deeply capable hands finally resting from their labour. They have passed the thread, the pen, the stylus, and the lamp to you. The work is done. The records are sealed. The stories have been bound and the maps are complete. Everything they touched was imbued with their dignity, and that dignity now surrounds you, creating a cocoon of absolute safety, clarity, and peace. There is nothing left for you to sort, nothing left for you to mend, and nothing left for you to prove. You are simply here in the stillness, held by the same quiet power that sustained them through their own times of challenge. Let the rhythm of the train, the ticking of the clock, the rustle of paper, and the soft glow of the nightlight become the lullaby of your rest. You are a part of their story now, and as you close your eyes you carry with you the silent, enduring promise they made to the future, that even in the darkest night there is order, there is beauty, and there is a name, yours, that deserves to be remembered, cherished, and kept safe. Sleep now, in the sanctuary they built for you. The light is soft, the night is kind, your work is finished, and all in this moment is perfectly, finally, and beautifully well. Sleepy History with Kevin is created for relaxation, entertainment, and sleep purposes. The stories shared on this channel are inspired by historical events, daily life, and real periods in history, but they may be simplified, adapted, or narrated in a calming way to enhance the listening experience. This content is not intended to be a precise academic or educational source. While we aim to stay generally accurate, some details may be altered for storytelling flow and relaxation. Please do not rely on this channel as a primary source for historical research or study. By listening, you acknowledge that this content is designed to help you unwind, relax, and fall asleep. Thank you for your understanding and support.